Question 1. A behavior analyst is observing a child's disruptive behavior during a 30-minute observation session. The analyst divides the session into 1-minute intervals. If the disruptive behavior occurs at any point during an interval, the analyst records that the behavior occurred for that interval. What measurement procedure is the behavior analyst using? A. Whole interval recording. B. Partial interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Duration recording. Answer: B. Partial interval recording. This question tests your understanding of common discontinuous measurement methods used in ABA. The key phrase here is "at any point" during the interval. This is the defining characteristic of partial interval recording. You score the interval if the behavior happens for even a moment within that interval. It often overestimates the total duration or frequency of the behavior. Whole interval recording requires the behavior to occur throughout the entire interval, while momentary time sampling only records if the behavior is happening right at the end of the interval. Duration recording measures how long the behavior lasts, which isn't described here. For example, if you were using partial interval recording to track a student tapping their pencil, you'd mark an interval even if they just tapped it once during that minute. Here's a tip. Partial means it only has to happen for part of the interval. Question 2. A client typically screams whenever their parent leaves the room. The screaming has reliably resulted in the parent returning to the room. This is an example of A. Positive punishment. B. Negative reinforcement. C. Positive reinforcement. D. Negative punishment. Answer: C. Positive reinforcement. This question tests your understanding of the basic operant conditioning principles, specifically reinforcement. The behavior is screaming. The consequence is the parent returning to the room. The effect on the behavior is that the screaming is likely to happen again in similar situations, because the parent returning reinforces it. Since something is added, the parent returning, and the behavior increases, screaming continues or increases. This is positive reinforcement. It's not punishment because the behavior isn't decreasing. It's not negative reinforcement because nothing is being removed. The parent is being added back. Remember, positive means adding something. Negative means removing something. Reinforcement increases behavior, and punishment decreases behavior. Question 3. Which of the following is the most important consideration when determining the operational definition of a behavior? A. It must be easy for the observer to remember. B. It must be measurable and observable. C. It must include the assumed function of the behavior. D. It must be stated in negative terms, what the behavior is not. Answer: B. It must be measurable and observable. This question is about writing a good behavioral definition, a foundational skill in ABA. The most critical aspect of an operational definition is that it allows anyone observing the behavior to agree on whether or not it occurred. This requires it to be objective, not based on feelings or assumptions, clear, easy to understand, and complete, specifying what is included and excluded. The core of this is being measurable and observable. You must be able to see or hear the behavior and count or time it. While easy to remember is helpful, it's not the primary requirement. Including the assumed function is speculative and not part of the definition itself. Definitions should be stated in positive terms, what the behavior is, not negative. Think of it like a clear rule for counting. Everyone has to count the same way. Question 4. A behavior analyst is teaching a child to request a break by saying, "Break, please." Initially, the analyst prompts the child to say the full phrase. Over several trials, the analyst reduces the amount of the prompt, first prompting just break, then just the B sound, until the child says "break please" independently. This is an example of A. Chaining. B. Shaping. C. Discrimination training. D. Fading. Answer: D. Fading. This question tests your knowledge of behavior change procedures, specifically prompting and prompt strategies. The scenario describes gradually removing the prompt, the help that was initially used to get the behavior to occur. This process of systematically reducing the prompt is called fading. Shaping involves differentially reinforcing successive approximations towards a new behavior. Chaining involves teaching a sequence of behaviors. Discrimination training involves teaching the client to respond differently to different stimuli. In this case, the target behavior, saying, "Brake please," remains the same, but the assistance to get it is reduced, which is the definition of fading. Picture it like a spotlight on the behavior that gets dimmer and dimmer as the person learns to do it on their own. Question 5. A supervisor is reviewing data collected by a new RBT, registered behavior technician. The supervisor notices that the RBT consistently records the behavior occurring throughout intervals when using partial interval recording, even when the behavior only happens for a few seconds. This indicates a potential issue with A. Treatment integrity. B. Stimulus control. C. Inter-observer agreement, IOA. D. Schedule of reinforcement. Answer: C. Inter-observer agreement, IOA. This question asks you to identify a common issue that can arise when collecting data and relates it to a quality control measure. IOA is when two or more observers independently record data on the same behavior at the same time, and then compare their records to see how much they agree. If the RBT's data doesn't match what the supervisor would record because the RBT is applying the definition or procedure incorrectly, like overmarking intervals in partial interval recording, this suggests low inter-observer agreement. It's not necessarily about the treatment itself, treatment integrity, or how stimuli control the behavior, stimulus control, or the reinforcement schedule. IOA is specifically about the reliability of the data collection itself. If different people watching the same thing get different numbers, your data might not be trustworthy. Question 6. Which statement best describes the philosophical position of radical behaviorism? A. It focuses only on observable behavior and rejects the study of internal events. B. It acknowledges the influence of private events, like thoughts and feelings, but views them as behavior influenced by the same principles as public behavior. C. It believes that behavior is primarily caused by underlying psychological processes and thoughts. D. It focuses solely on the physiological causes of behavior. Answer: B. It acknowledges the influence of private events, like thoughts and feelings, but views them as behavior influenced by the same principles as public behavior. This question delves into the philosophical foundations of ABA. Radical behaviorism, championed by B. F. Skinner, is distinct from methodological behaviorism. Methodological behaviorism, option A, ignores internal events because they aren't publicly observable. Radical behaviorism, however, includes all behavior, both public, what others can see, and private, like thinking, feeling, sensing, and seeks to understand the environmental factors that influence both. It doesn't see thoughts as causes of behavior in the traditional sense, option C, but rather as more behavior to be explained. It's not solely focused on physiology, option D. Think of it this way. Radical behaviorism says your thoughts are a type of behavior, and they are also influenced by your environment, just like kicking a ball is. Question 7. A behavior analyst is developing a behavior intervention plan for a child who engages in hitting. The plan includes a procedure where, if the child hits, they are immediately removed from the activity they were engaged in and required to sit quietly for 3 minutes in a designated chair. This procedure is most likely an example of A. Response cost. B. Timeout from positive reinforcement. C. Extinction. D. Positive punishment. Answer: B. Timeout from positive reinforcement. This question tests your ability to identify a specific type of punishment procedure. The behavior is hitting, and the consequence is removal from a reinforcing activity to a less reinforcing environment. Timeout. This is specifically timeout from positive reinforcement, as the child is being removed from access to things they likely find rewarding. The activity response cost involves removing a specific reinforcer, like taking away a token. Extinction involves withholding reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior. Positive punishment involves adding an aversive stimulus. The key here is the removal from the reinforcing environment contingent on the behavior. Imagine being sent to your room when you misbehave. That's often a form of timeout. Question 8. A graph showing a cumulative record of responses is characterized by A. The total number of responses increasing over time. B. A steep slope indicating a low response rate. C. Data points that connect the rate of behavior across different conditions. D. The total number of responses resetting to 0 at the start of each session. Answer: A. The total number of responses increasing over time. This question asks about a specific type of graph used in ABA, the cumulative record. On a cumulative record, the total number of responses is plotted over time. This means the line on the graph can only go up or stay flat if no responses occur, but it can never go down because responses are added to the previous total. A steeper slope indicates a higher response rate, not lower. Option B. Option C describes a standard line graph comparing conditions. Option describes how data might be plotted on a standard frequency graph per session, not a cumulative record. Think of it like a running tally. The number just keeps adding up. Question 9. Before implementing an extinction procedure for a behavior maintained by attention, it is crucial to A. Ensure the behavior analyst is the only person interacting with the client. B. Identify all possible reinforcers for the behavior. C. Determine if the behavior is dangerous to the client or others. D. Implement a differential reinforcement procedure simultaneously. Answer: C. Determine if the behavior is dangerous to the client or others. This question highlights a critical ethical and practical consideration before using extinction. Extinction involves withholding reinforcement for a behavior, which can lead to an extinction burst, a temporary increase in the behavior's intensity, frequency, or duration, and spontaneous recovery. If the behavior is dangerous, like severe aggression or self-injury, these extinction effects could be harmful. Therefore, safety is a primary concern. Option C. While identifying other reinforcers, Option B, is important for a complete FBA, and using differential reinforcement, Option D, is often done alongside extinction. Assessing danger takes precedence. Option A is unrealistic and not necessary. Always ask yourself, is this behavior safe to ignore? Question 10. A motivating operation, MO, that increases the effectiveness of a stimulus as a reinforcer is called a abolishing operation, AO. B. Discriminative stimulus, SD. C. Establishing operation, EO. D. Conditioned motivating operation, CMO. Answer: C. Establishing operation, EO. This question tests your understanding of motivating operations, which are environmental variables that alter the effectiveness of a reinforcer and the frequency of behavior that has been reinforced by that stimulus. An establishing operation, EO, increases the value of a reinforcer. For example, being deprived of food, an EO, makes food a more effective reinforcer and makes you more likely to engage in behaviors that have previously resulted in getting food. An abolishing operation, AO, does the opposite. It decreases the effectiveness of a reinforcer, like being full of food makes food less reinforcing. A discriminative stimulus, SD, signals the availability of reinforcement, but doesn't change its value. A CMO is a type of MO, but the specific term for increasing reinforcer effectiveness is EO. Think of it like turning up the volume on how much you want something. Question 11. A client screams when they want attention. A behavior analyst implements a plan where screaming is ignored, extinction, and the client is prompted to say, "Excuse me." When the client says, "Excuse me," they immediately receive attention, reinforcement. This procedure is an example of A. Differential reinforcement of other behavior, DRO. B. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, DRA. C. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. DRI. D. The differential reinforcement of low rates. DRL. Answer B. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. DRA. This question describes a common differential reinforcement procedure. Differential reinforcement involves reinforcing one behavior while withholding reinforcement for another. In this case, the analyst is reinforcing saying, "Excuse me," an alternative behavior, while putting screaming on extinction. DRI reinforces a behavior that is different from the target behavior you want to decrease, but doesn't necessarily need to be physically impossible to do at the same time as the target behavior. DDRI. Option C is a specific type of DRA where the alternative behavior is physically incompatible with the target behavior, example, reinforcing sitting when the target is standing. DRO. Option A involves reinforcing the absence of the target behavior for a specific period. DRL, option D, reinforces the behavior only if it occurs at a lower rate than before. Here, saying "excuse me" is a clear alternative to screaming. Question 12. Which of the following best defines a stimulus delta, SD? A. A stimulus that signals that reinforcement is available for a specific behavior. B. A stimulus that signals that reinforcement is not available for a specific behavior. C. A stimulus that signals that punishment is likely to occur for a specific behavior. D. A stimulus that changes the effectiveness of a reinforcer. Answer. B. A stimulus that signals that reinforcement is not available for a specific behavior. This question tests your understanding of stimulus control and discriminative stimuli. An SD, discriminative stimulus, option A, is a stimulus in whose presence a particular behavior has been reinforced, making the behavior more likely to occur when that stimulus is present. An SD is the opposite. It's a stimulus in whose presence a particular behavior has not been reinforced, or has been extinguished or punished. This makes the behavior less likely to occur when the SD is present. Option C describes a discriminative stimulus for punishment. SDEEP. Option describes a motivating operation. MO. Think of traffic lights. Green is an SD for going. Reinforcement is available for moving. And red is an SD for going. Reinforcement is not available and punishment is possible. Question 13. A behavior analyst is designing a training program for staff. The analyst uses behavior-specific praise, modeling, and corrective feedback. The analyst is likely focusing on improving A. Client manding. B. Staff treatment integrity. C. Client social skills. D. Staff public speaking abilities. Answer. B. Staff treatment integrity. This question focuses on staff training and supervision within ABA. Treatment integrity, also called procedural fidelity, refers to how accurately and consistently an intervention plan is implemented as written. When training staff, behavior analysts use strategies like modeling, showing them how to do it, behavior-specific praise, telling them exactly what they did right, and corrective feedback, telling them exactly what needs to be changed to ensure they carry out the procedures correctly. This directly impacts how reliably the treatment is delivered to the client. While good staff skills might indirectly benefit client manding or social skills, the described training techniques are specifically aimed at ensuring the staff implement the plan correctly. Question 14. A behavior intervention plan states that the RBT should provide attention every time the client engages in a target social behavior. This describes which type of reinforcement schedule. A. Variable interval, VI. B. Fixed ratio, FR. C. Continuous reinforcement, CRF. D. Variable ratio, VR. Answer. C. Continuous reinforcement, CRF. This question tests your knowledge of basic schedules of reinforcement. A continuous reinforcement schedule, CRF, provides reinforcement for every single occurrence of the target behavior. The phrase "every time" is the key indicator here. Fixed ratio, FR, provides reinforcement after a fixed number of responses. Variable ratio, VR, provides reinforcement after a varying number of responses. Variable interval, VI, provides reinforcement for the first response after a varying amount of time. CRF is often used when teaching a new behavior because it makes the connection between the behavior and the consequence very clear and helps the behavior occur reliably initially. Question 15. Which experimental design involves systematically applying an intervention to the same behavior sequentially across different settings, behaviors, or subjects? A. Reversal design, ABA/ABAB. B. Multiple baseline design. C. Alternating treatments design, ADD/multi-element. D. Changing criterion design. Answer B. Multiple baseline design. This question asks about different experimental designs used to demonstrate a functional relationship between an intervention and a behavior. The description of applying the intervention sequentially across different baselines, settings, behaviors, or individuals, while keeping the other baselines in the baseline condition is the hallmark of a multiple baseline design. This design is useful when reversing the intervention is not feasible or ethical. A reversal design involves alternating between baseline and intervention phases for a single behavior/subject/setting. In alternating treatments, design rapidly switches between two or more conditions. A changing criterion design involves gradually changing the required level of behavior to earn reinforcement. Think of it like starting the intervention at different times for different groups or situations. Question 16. A behavior analyst is teaching a child to identify colors. When the analyst holds up a red card and says, "Touch red," and the child touches the red card, the analyst praises the child. When the analyst holds up a blue card and says, "Touch red," and the child touches the blue card, the analyst says, "Nope." This is an example of A. Generalization training. B. Discrimination training. C. Stimulus equivalence training. D. Shaping. Answer B. Discrimination training. This question describes a classic example of discrimination training. Discrimination training involves teaching the client to respond differently to different stimuli. Here, the child is learning to discriminate between the red card, the discriminative stimulus, SD, for touching red, and the blue card, a stimulus delta, SD, for touching red. The response, touching, is reinforced in the presence of the SD. Red card when asked for red, and not reinforced or punished in the presence of the SD. Blue card when asked for red. Generalization is responding similarly to different stimuli. Shaping is reinforcing successive approximations of a behavior. Stimulus equivalence is a more complex concept involving untrained relationships between stimuli. The child is learning which stimulus occasions the correct response. Question 17. A client engages in frequent hand flapping, which a functional assessment suggests is automatically reinforced. It feels good. To decrease this behavior, the behavior analyst provides the client with access to a variety of sensory toys, example fidget spinners, squishy balls, before the hand flapping occurs to make the automatic reinforcement from hand flapping less valuable. This is an example of a strategy based on A. Positive punishment. B. Non-contingent reinforcement, NCR. C. Motivating operations, MOs. D. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, DRI. Answer C. Motivating operations, MOs. This question is testing your understanding of how motivating operations can be used in interventions. By providing access to sensory toys before the behavior, the analyst is attempting to abolish the reinforcing effectiveness of the sensory stimulation obtained from hand flapping. This is manipulating a motivating operation, specifically an abolishing operation, AO, to reduce the motivation to engage in the problem behavior. Positive punishment involves adding an aversive stimulus after the behavior. NCR involves providing reinforcement on a fixed or variable time schedule independent of the behavior. DRI involves reinforcing a specific incompatible behavior. while giving sensory toys might function as NCR or could support a DRI. The core principle being applied by providing access beforehand to reduce the value of the automatic reinforcement is the manipulation of an MO. You're trying to make the reward from hand flapping less appealing by making the person full on similar sensory input. Question 18. The statement behavior is a function of its consequences most closely aligns with which concept? A. Phylogeny. B. Respondent conditioning. C. Operant conditioning. D. Mentalism. Answer: C. Operant conditioning. This question tests your understanding of fundamental behavioral principles. The phrase behavior is a function of its consequences is a cornerstone of operant conditioning. Operant behavior is learned through its history of consequences: reinforcement, punishment, extinction. Consequences either increase or decrease the future probability of the behavior. Phylogeny relates to the evolutionary history of a species. Respondent conditioning, Pavlovian conditioning, involves pairing stimuli to elicit involuntary responses. Mentalism attributes behavior to internal, non-observable states like thoughts, feelings, or intentions, which is counter to this statement. Operant conditioning focuses on how what happens after a behavior influences whether it happens again. Question 19. Which ethical principle requires behavior analysts to operate within their boundaries of competence? A. Beneficence, doing good. B. Fidelity, trustworthiness. C. Justice, fairness. D. Professionalism and integrity. Answer: D. Professionalism and integrity. This question relates to the ethical code for behavior analysts. While all ethical principles are important, the requirement to practice within your scope of expertise falls most directly under the principle of professionalism and integrity. This involves being truthful, honest, and operating within your training and experience. Beneficence relates to working for the client's best interests. Fidelity involves being trustworthy in your professional relationships. Justice relates to non-discrimination and fair access to services. Knowing your limits and not taking on cases you aren't qualified for is a key part of being a responsible professional. Question 20. A client is learning to tie their shoes using a backward chaining procedure. The behavior analyst will first teach the client to A. Complete all steps with assistance, then fade prompts. B. Complete the very last step of the chain independently. C. Complete the very first step of the chain independently. D. Complete the easiest step of the chain independently. Answer: B. Complete the very last step of the chain independently. This question tests your understanding of behavioral chaining procedures. In backward chaining, you break a complex skill, like tying shoes, into smaller steps. You then teach the steps starting from the last step of the chain. The trainer completes all steps except the last one, and the client learns to do the final step independently. Once the client masters the last step, the trainer completes all steps except the last two, and the client learns to do those two independently, and so on, working backward through the chain. The rationale is that the completion of the last step immediately results in the finished product, the tied shoe, providing automatic reinforcement. Forward chaining, option C, teaches the first step first. Question 21. When using a changing criterion design, experimental control is demonstrated when A. The behavior changes in a step-like fashion each time the reinforcement criterion changes. B. The behavior decreases significantly in the presence of the intervention. C. The behavior returns to baseline levels when the intervention is removed. D. The intervention is staggered across multiple baselines. Answer: A. The behavior changes in a step-like fashion each time the reinforcement criterion changes. This question asks how to show that your intervention is causing the behavior change in a changing criterion design. In this design, you set a specific level of behavior required for reinforcement, the criterion, and systematically raise or lower it over time. Experimental control is shown if the client's behavior consistently matches the changing criterion level. It's like the behavior is tracking the requirement you're setting. Option B describes control shown in many designs, but not specifically the changing criterion design's hallmark. Option C describes control in a reversal design. Option D describes control in a multiple baseline design. The defining feature of this design is the behavior following the steps of the criterion. Question 22. A behavior analyst is conducting a functional assessment. Which of the following methods involves observing the behavior in the natural environment and recording antecedents, behaviors, and consequences? ABC data. A. Indirect assessment. B. Descriptive assessment. C. Functional analysis. D. Preference assessment. Answer. B. Descriptive assessment. This question asks about different types of functional assessment methods. Descriptive assessment involves observing and recording the behavior as it occurs in the natural environment, typically by collecting ABC data to identify potential patterns between the behavior and the events that precede and follow it. It describes correlations, but doesn't prove causation. Indirect assessment, option A, involves gathering information through interviews or questionnaires. Functional analysis, option C, involves manipulating antecedents and consequences in a controlled environment to determine the function experimentally. Preference assessment, option D, identifies potential reinforcers. The key here is observing and recording in the natural setting without directly manipulating variables. Question 23. Which schedule of reinforcement is most resistant to extinction? A. Continuous reinforcement, CRF. B. Fixed ratio, FR. C. Variable interval, VI. D. Fixed interval, FI. Answer. C. Variable interval, VI. This question tests your knowledge of how different schedules of reinforcement affect resistance to extinction. Behavior that has been reinforced on intermittent schedules, like VR or VI, is generally more resistant to extinction than behavior reinforced on continuous reinforcement, CRF. Among the intermittent schedules, ratio schedules, FR, VR, often produce higher rates of response, while interval schedules, phi, VI, produce more consistent rates over time. However, variable schedules, VR, VI, make it harder for the individual to predict when the next reinforcement will occur, making the behavior persist longer when reinforcement is stopped compared to fixed schedules, FR, FI, or CRF. CRF produces rapid learning but low resistance to extinction. Think of checking your email, VI. You keep checking because you don't know exactly when a new email will arrive, making that checking behavior resistant to extinction if emails stop coming temporarily. Question 24. A behavior analyst is supervising a new RBT. The RBT arrives late for a session, misses important data, and fails to implement a procedure correctly. Which ethical code requirement is the RBT primarily violating? A. Boundaries of competence. B. Integrity. C. Responsibility to clients. D. Responsibility to supervisees. Answer. C. Responsibility to clients. This question relates ethical principles to RBT conduct, while the RBT's actions touch on integrity, being honest about time/data, and potentially competence if they don't understand the procedure. The primary ethical violation is the direct impact on the client's services and progress. Arriving late, missing data, and incorrectly implementing procedures directly compromise the quality of care and the client's potential benefit from services, violating the fundamental responsibility to act in the client's best interest and provide effective treatment. The supervisor has a responsibility to the supervisee. Option D. But the RBT's actions are a direct violation of their duty to the client. Option C. Question 25. The primary purpose of a baseline phase in an experimental design is to A. Provide a period for the client to get used to the observer. B. Measure the behavior before the intervention is implemented. C. Determine the function of the target behavior. D. Establish the terminal behavior goal. Answer. B. Measure the behavior before the intervention is implemented. This question is about the fundamental purpose of baseline data in experimental designs in ABA. Baseline is the phase where you take repeated measurements of the behavior before you introduce any intervention. This provides a standard of comparison. Once you introduce the intervention, you compare the behavior rate or other dimension during the intervention phase to the baseline phase to see if the intervention had an effect. Option A might be a secondary benefit, but isn't the primary purpose. Option C describes a functional assessment. Option D describes goal setting, which happens before intervention, but isn't what the baseline phase is. Baseline is simply your starting point measurement. Question 26. A behavior analyst is conducting a stimulus preference assessment with a client. Which of the following is not a common method for conducting a stimulus preference assessment? A. Paired stimulus. B. Multiple stimulus without replacement, MSWO. C. Free operant observation. D. ABC recording. Answer. D. ABC recording. This question asks you to identify something that isn't a type of stimulus preference assessment. Preference assessments are systematic ways to figure out what items or activities a person likes, which can then be used as potential reinforcers. Paired stimulus, MSWO, and free operant observation are all standard, systematic methods for conducting preference assessments. ABC recording, on the other hand, is a method for collecting data during a descriptive functional assessment to understand the relationship between antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. It's used to understand why a behavior occurs, not to identify preferred items. Question 27. Which of the following describes a behavior that is under tight stimulus control? A. The behavior occurs reliably only in the presence of a specific stimulus. B. The behavior occurs frequently across many different settings and situations. C. The behavior is resistant to extinction. D. The behavior is likely maintained by automatic reinforcement. Answer. A. The behavior occurs reliably only in the presence of a specific stimulus. This question tests your understanding of stimulus control. When a behavior is under stimulus control, it is more likely to occur in the presence of a particular stimulus, the SD, than in its absence, the SD. Tight stimulus control means this relationship is very strong. The behavior happens almost exclusively when the specific SD is present. Option B describes generalization, which is the opposite of tight stimulus control. Option C relates to reinforcement schedules. Option D relates to the maintaining consequence, not stimulus control. Think of a phone ringing, SD. You are under tight stimulus control if you only answer that specific ringtone and not other sounds. Question 28. A behavior analyst is developing a behavior reduction plan for screaming that is maintained by attention. Which of the following is the most appropriate function-based intervention component? A. Provide a high-magnitude edible reinforcer every time screaming occurs. B. Implement planned ignoring for screaming and reinforce a communication skill like tapping. C. Implement a timeout procedure contingent on screaming. D. Implement a response cost system where tokens are lost for screaming. Answer. B. Implement planned ignoring for screaming and reinforce a communication skill like tapping. This question emphasizes the importance of function-based interventions. If screaming is maintained by attention, the intervention should address that function. Planned ignoring, extinction, removes the attention, thus targeting the maintaining consequence. Simultaneously reinforcing an alternative behavior, tapping for attention, provides the client with an appropriate way to access the same reinforcer, attention. Option A would reinforce screaming, increasing the behavior. Options C and D are punishment procedures that don't directly address the function of attention seeking and should only be considered after reinforcement-based strategies and with careful ethical consideration. A function-based approach means giving them a better way to get what they want. Question 29. A student is learning to identify written words. The teacher holds up the written word cat and says, "What word?" The student says CAT. The teacher praises the student. This is an example of A. Tact. B. Manned. C. Echoic. D. Intraverbal. Answer D. Intraverbal. This question tests your understanding of F. Skinner's verbal operants. An intraverbal is a verbal response to another verbal stimulus, where there is no point-to-point correspondence between the stimulus and the response. The stimulus is the teacher saying, "What word?" and the written word cat. The response is the student saying cat. This is like filling in the blank or answering a question. A tact, option A, is naming something in the environment. That's a cat. A manned, option B, is a request, "Can I have the cat?" An echoic, option C, is repeating something someone else said. Cat. The key here is the verbal stimulus prompts a verbal response that isn't a repetition or a name of something present. Question 30. The principle of parsimony suggests that when trying to explain a phenomenon, we should A. Choose the explanation that is most complex. B. Choose the explanation that is the simplest and requires the fewest assumptions. C. Choose the explanation that is most intuitive or common sense. D. Choose the explanation that involves hypothetical constructs. Answer B. Choose the explanation that is the simplest and requires the fewest assumptions. This question relates to one of the philosophical assumptions of science, particularly relevant to behavior analysis. Parsimony, also known as Occam's razor, states that when you have competing explanations for a phenomenon, the simplest explanation that accounts for all the data is usually the best one. In behavior analysis, this means looking for environmental explanations for behavior before resorting to more complex or internal explanations. Don't make things more complicated than they need to be. Question 31. A researcher is comparing the effectiveness of two different reading interventions. The researcher rapidly alternates between implementing intervention A during one session and intervention B during the next session for the same group of students. What experimental design is being used? A. Multiple baseline design. B. Reversal design. C. Alternating treatments design. ATD. D. Changing criterion design. Answer C. Alternating treatments design. D. This question describes the key feature of an alternating treatments design. D. Also known as a multi-element design. In an ATD, two or more distinct interventions are rapidly alternated, often within the same session or across consecutive sessions, allowing for direct comparison of their effectiveness on the same behavior. The rapid alternation helps to control for extraneous variables. Multiple baseline designs stagger the introduction of the intervention. Reversal designs alternate between baseline and intervention phases. Changing criterion designs gradually change the requirement for reinforcement. The speed and variety of interventions being tested side-by-side points to the ATD. Question 32. A behavior analyst is evaluating a potential intervention. The analyst wants to know if the intervention will work for the client in their everyday environment. This is a question of A. Internal validity. B. External validity. C. Reliability. D. Treatment integrity. Answer B. External validity. This question is about evaluating research and intervention effectiveness. External validity refers to the extent to which the findings of a study or the results of an intervention can be generalized to other settings, people, or behaviors. If an intervention works in a controlled clinic setting but not in the client's home or school, it has low external validity for those environments. Internal validity, option A, is the extent to which you can confidently say the intervention caused the behavior change within the study itself. Reliability, option C, relates to the consistency of measurement. Treatment integrity, option D, is about how accurately the intervention is implemented. External validity asks, will this work out there? Question 33. Which of the following is the BS definition of a conditioned reinforcer? A. A stimulus that is reinforcing without any prior learning history. B. A stimulus that becomes reinforcing after being paired with an unconditioned or other conditioned reinforcer. C. A stimulus that decreases the future probability of a behavior. D. A stimulus that evokes a response due to a history of pairing with an unconditioned stimulus. Answer: B. A stimulus that becomes reinforcing after being paired with an unconditioned or other conditioned reinforcer. This question tests your understanding of different types of reinforcers. A conditioned reinforcer, also called a secondary reinforcer, is something that a person learns to find reinforcing because it has been repeatedly associated with a primary, unconditioned reinforcer or another established conditioned reinforcer. Money, praise, tokens, and toys are common examples. We aren't born finding them reinforcing. We learn their value. An unconditioned reinforcer, option A, is naturally reinforcing, like food or water. Option C describes a punisher. Option describes a conditioned stimulus, CS, in respondent conditioning. Question 34. When prioritizing behaviors for intervention, which of the following should generally be given the highest priority? A. Behaviors that are easiest to change. B. Behaviors that are dangerous to the client or others. C. Behaviors that are annoying to the client's family. D. The behaviors that have been targeted in previous interventions. Answer: B. Behaviors that are dangerous to the client or others. This question involves ethical considerations and prioritization of behavior change goals. Safety is paramount in ABA practice. Any behavior that poses a risk of harm to the client or those around them, like severe aggression, self-injury, or elopement into unsafe areas, should be addressed with the highest priority, even if other behaviors are easier to change or more annoying. While family concerns are important, safety overrides annoyance. Previous intervention targets are relevant, but safety is the immediate concern. Always prioritize safety first. Question 35. A client's behavior occurs at a consistently high rate. The behavior analyst wants to reduce the rate of this behavior, but does not want to eliminate it entirely. Which differential reinforcement procedure would be most appropriate? A. DRO, differential reinforcement of other behavior. B. DDRI, differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. C. DDRL, differential reinforcement of low rates. D. DDRA, differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. Answer: C. DRL, differential reinforcement of low rates. This question asks you to choose the appropriate differential reinforcement procedure based on the desired outcome for the behavior's rate. DRL is specifically used to reduce the rate of a behavior, but not eliminate it. Reinforcement is delivered if the behavior occurs at a rate lower than a specified level or if a minimum amount of time has passed between responses. Spaced responding DRL, or within a block of time, interval DRL. DRO, DRI, and DRA are typically used when the goal is to eliminate or significantly reduce the behavior by reinforcing zero occurrences. DRO, an incompatible behavior, DRI, or an alternative behavior, DRA. If you just need less of the behavior, DRL is your tool. Question 36. A client frequently engages in non-contextual humming. A functional assessment suggests this is maintained by automatic reinforcement. An intervention involves providing the client with headphones playing music whenever the client is not humming. What is the most likely function of the music being provided? A. Positive reinforcement for not humming. B. Negative reinforcement for not humming. C. An establishing operation for humming. D. An abolishing operation for the automatic reinforcement of humming. Answer: A. Positive reinforcement for not humming. This question asks you to analyze an intervention component based on its potential function. The intervention provides music contingent on the client not humming. The music is being added, plus, and the absence of humming and other behavior is being reinforced, with the goal of increasing the time the client spends not humming. This is an example of differential reinforcement of other behavior, DRO, where the absence of the target behavior is reinforced. Negative reinforcement would involve removing something aversive. Option C is incorrect. Music isn't likely making humming more valuable. While providing alternative stimulation could function as an AO for the automatic reinforcement of humming, the contingency described, providing music when not humming, fits positive reinforcement for the desired behavior, not humming. You're adding something good, musicy, when they do the right thing, not humming. Question 37. When conducting a skill acquisition program that involves multiple steps, such as washing hands or brushing teeth, a behavior analyst would most likely use which procedure? A. Discrete trial training, DTT. B. Shaping. C. Chaining. D. Differential reinforcement. Answer: C. Chaining. This question points to a procedure specifically designed for teaching complex skills that involve a sequence of steps. Chaining breaks down a multi-step task into smaller, manageable steps and teaches the individual to perform them in a specific order. Washing hands, brushing teeth, and getting dressed are classic examples of tasks taught using chaining procedures: forward, backward, or total task. DTT is a method of teaching discrete skills one-on-one. Shaping involves reinforcing successive approximations towards a single terminal behavior. Differential reinforcement is a principle used in various procedures, including chaining, but chaining itself is the procedure for teaching the sequence. Think of a chain linking together different actions to complete a task. Question 38. A behavior analyst is supervising an RBT who is struggling to implement a complex prompting procedure. The most effective initial step for the supervisor to take is likely to: A. Document the RBT's failure in their supervision notes. B. Review the written procedure with the RBT and model how to implement it. C. Tell the RBT to try harder and ask for help if needed. D. Assign the RBT to a different client. Answer: B. Review the written procedure with the RBT and model how to implement it. This question relates to effective supervision strategies. When a supervisee is struggling with a procedure, the most direct and helpful approach is to provide training and support. Reviewing the procedure ensures understanding, and modeling, showing them how to do it, provides a clear example. Documenting is necessary, but not the first step for support. Telling them to try harder is unhelpful. Assigning a different client might be a last resort, but doesn't address the RBT's skill deficit. Good supervision involves teaching and guiding. Question 39. Which type of graph is most appropriate for displaying the overall rate of a behavior that can occur multiple times per observation period and where you want to see the cumulative progress? A. Bar graph. B. Cumulative record. C. Scatter plot. D. Phase change line graph. Answer: B. Cumulative record. This question asks about selecting the appropriate graph type. A cumulative record is specifically designed to show the total number of responses emitted over time. This allows you to see the overall rate. Steeper slope means higher rate, and the cumulative progress of the behavior. A bar graph is typically used to compare discrete sets of data, example, average behavior per condition. A scatter plot shows the relationship between two variables. A phase change line graph, standard line graph, shows the level of behavior across different phases, usually on a per-session basis, not a cumulative total. If you want to see the running total of responses, use a cumulative record. Question 40. A behavior analyst is working with a client who engages in property destruction when presented with academic tasks. The functional assessment indicates the behavior is maintained by escape. A function-based intervention might involve: A. Providing attention contingent on property destruction. B. Implementing a token economy where tokens are lost for property destruction. C. Teaching the client to request a break from academic tasks. D. Having the client clean up the destroyed property. Answer C. Teaching the client to request a break from academic tasks. This question again emphasizes function-based intervention, this time for escape-maintained behavior. If property destruction happens to escape academic tasks, a function-based intervention should provide a more appropriate way to access that same consequence, getting a break. Teaching the client to demand for a break. Option C. Allows them to escape appropriately. Option A provides attention, which doesn't match the escape function. Options B and D are punishment-based, response cost, and contingent exercise/restitution, which may suppress the behavior but don't teach an alternative way to escape and aren't function-based alone. Give them an acceptable escape route. Question 41. A primary advantage of using a multiple baseline design over a reversal design is that it A. Allows for a faster demonstration of experimental control. B. Does not require withdrawing the intervention. C. Is more effective for behaviors maintained by automatic reinforcement. D. Can demonstrate multiple functional relations simultaneously. Answer B. Does not require withdrawing the intervention. This question compares two common experimental designs. A major advantage of the multiple baseline design is that it demonstrates experimental control without requiring the removal or reversal of the intervention. This is crucial when the behavior is dangerous, unethical to reverse, or likely to generalize widely if reversed. Reversal designs. ABA/ABAB. Explicitly require withdrawing the intervention to show control. Option A is generally false. ATDs are faster for comparison, and reversals can be quick depending on stability. Option C isn't a specific advantage of multiple baseline designs. While it can demonstrate multiple functional relations, that's not the primary advantage over a reversal design. The main difference is the lack of reversal. Question 42. Which concept describes a situation where a response trained in one setting occurs in other settings without specific training in those settings? A. Discrimination. B. Stimulus control. C. Generalization. D. Differentiation. Answer C. Generalization. This question asks about the occurrence of behavior across different environments. Generalization is the process where a behavior that has been reinforced in the presence of a specific stimulus or in a specific setting occurs in the presence of similar stimuli or in different settings without direct training in those new conditions. Discrimination, option A, is responding differently to different stimuli. Stimulus control, option B, is the likelihood of a behavior occurring in the presence of a specific stimulus. Differentiation, related to shaping, is reinforcing specific forms or topographies of a behavior. Generalization is essentially the spreading of the behavior to new situations. Question 43. A behavior analyst is teaching a child to label animals. When showing a picture of a dog, the analyst says dog. After many trials, when the analyst shows the picture of the dog, the child says dog. This is an example of teaching A. A. Manned. B. Etrog. C. Tact. D. Intraverbal. Answer. C. Tact. This question tests your understanding of verbal operants again. A tact is a verbal response that names or labels something in the environment. The stimulus is the picture of the dog, nonverbal, and the response is saying dog, verbal. The response is under the control of the nonverbal stimulus. The analyst saying dog initially was a prompt, which was likely faded. This is teaching the child to name the picture. It's not a manned request, an echoic repetition of someone's speech without the object present, or an intraverbal, verbal response controlled by another verbal stimulus. Question 44. When preparing for a supervision session, a supervisee should know T. A. Prepare an agenda of topics to discuss. B. Summarize their work with clients and data. C. Expect the supervisor to prepare the entire session content. D. Identify challenges or questions they have. Answer. C. Expect the supervisor to prepare the entire session content. This question addresses the responsibilities within a supervision relationship. Effective supervision is a collaborative process. While the supervisor guides and teaches, the supervisee is responsible for coming prepared, actively participating, bringing up their cases and questions, and utilizing the supervisor's expertise. Expecting the supervisor to provide all the content and direction without input from the supervisee would make the session less relevant to the supervisee's actual work and learning needs. Supervisees need to take ownership of their learning process. Question 45. A behavior analyst is conducting a functional analysis of a child's aggression. In the alone condition, where no one is present and no demands are placed, the aggression occurs at a high rate. This suggests the aggression is most likely maintained by A. Attention, B. Tangibles, C. Escape, D. Automatic reinforcement. Answer D. Automatic reinforcement. This question tests your ability to interpret functional analysis results. In a typical functional analysis structure, different conditions are run to isolate the consequence maintaining the behavior. The alone condition removes social consequences, attention from others, and demands potential escape. If the behavior still occurs frequently in this condition, it suggests that the reinforcement is coming from within the behavior itself, without needing external consequences from others. This is characteristic of automatically maintained behavior. Example, it feels good, provides sensory input. High rates in the attention condition suggest attention maintenance, in the tangible condition suggest tangible maintenance, and in the escape condition suggest escape maintenance. Question 46. A behavior intervention plan includes a consequence that states, if the client screams, immediately remove their favorite toy for 5 minutes. This is an example of A. Timeout from positive reinforcement, B. Response cost, C. Positive punishment, D. Extinction. Answer B. Response cost. This question asks you to identify a specific punishment procedure. Response cost involves the removal of a specific earned reinforcer or a certain amount of a reinforcer contingent on the behavior. In this case, the specific reinforcer is the favorite toy, and it is removed for a period after the screaming occurs. Timeout from positive reinforcement, option A, involves removing the person from the reinforcing environment. Positive punishment, option C, involves adding an aversive stimulus. Extinction, option D, involves withholding the maintaining reinforcer. Here, a specific item is taken away as a consequence. Question 47. The primary purpose of establishing a clear hierarchy of prompts before starting a skill acquisition program is to A. Ensure the program is implemented consistently by all staff. B. Allow for rapid fading of prompts to promote independence. C. Determine the client's current skill level. D. Identify potential reinforcers for the client. Answer B. Allow for rapid fading of prompts to promote independence. This question is about prompting strategies. Having a clear hierarchy of prompts, example, full physical, partial physical, gestural, visual, verbal, means you know exactly how much help to give and in what order. This systematic approach facilitates prompt fading, gradually reducing the level of assistance. The goal of prompt fading is to transfer stimulus control from the prompt to the natural stimulus, leading to independent responding. While a hierarchy contributes to consistency, option A, its primary purpose is to enable systematic fading towards independence. Option B. Determining skill level, option C, happens before, and identifying reinforcers, option D, is a separate assessment. Question 48. Which type of measurement provides an estimate of the occurrence of a behavior by recording if it happens at the very end of specific intervals? A. Frequency, B. Duration, C. Whole interval recording, D. Momentary time sampling. Answer D. Momentary time sampling. This question asks about a specific discontinuous measurement method. Momentary time sampling involves observing whether a behavior is occurring only at the exact moment the interval ends. If it is happening at that specific second, you mark the interval. If not, you don't. Frequency counts every instance. Duration measures how long the behavior lasts. Whole interval recording requires the behavior to occur throughout the entire interval. The key here is the very end of the interval. Question 49. A behavior analyst is working with a non-vocal client to teach them to request items by handing a picture card to a communication partner. This is an example of teaching A. Tact. B. Mand. C. Etroic. D. Intraverbal. Answer. B. Mand. This question tests your understanding of verbal operants applied to alternative communication. A mand is a request controlled by a motivating operation example wanting an item and reinforced by receiving that item. Handing a picture of an apple when the client wants an apple is a request for the apple, functional for getting the apple. This fits the definition of a mand, regardless of whether it's vocal or uses pictures. Picture Exchange Communication System, PCS. The other options are verbal behaviors that serve different functions. Question 50. The ethical principle of doing no harm is most closely associated with which term? A. Beneficence. B. Fidelity. C. Non-maleficence. D. Justice. Answer. C. Non-maleficence. This question tests your knowledge of ethical principles in ABA. Non-maleficence means avoiding or minimizing harm, while beneficence, doing good, implies avoiding harm as well. Non-maleficence specifically focuses on the responsibility to not cause harm. Fidelity is about trustworthiness. Justice is about fairness. If beneficence is about promoting well-being, non-maleficence is the direct instruction to first, do no harm. Question 51. A client's aggression increases dramatically immediately after an extinction procedure is implemented. This temporary increase in frequency or intensity is known as A. Spontaneous recovery. B. Resurgence. C. Extinction burst. D. Behavioral momentum. Answer. C. Extinction burst. This question describes a common effect observed when extinction is used. An extinction burst is a temporary and often abrupt increase in the frequency, intensity, or duration of the behavior that is being put on extinction, sometimes accompanied by novel behaviors or increased emotional responding. Spontaneous recovery, option A, is the reappearance of the extinguished behavior after a break. Resurgence, option B, is the reappearance of a previously reinforced behavior when a currently reinforced behavior is put on extinction. Behavioral momentum, option D, relates to the persistence of behavior following high probability requests. The sudden spike right after stopping reinforcement is the extinction burst. Question 52. When selecting target behaviors for intervention, it is crucial that the behaviors are A. Observable and measurable. B. Behaviors the client's family dislikes. C. Behaviors that occur at a high frequency. D. Behaviors that are easy to change. Answer. A. Observable and measurable. This question reiterates a core requirement for defining and selecting behaviors in ABA. For any intervention to be effective and its impact evaluated objectively, the target behavior must be defined in a way that different people can agree on whether it occurred and can collect data on it consistently. This requires the definition to be observable, you can see or hear it, and measurable, you can count or time it. While family preference and frequency are factors, they don't negate the need for an objective definition. Ease of change is a consideration for prioritization, but not a requirement for selecting any target behavior. Question 53. A behavior analyst is trying to increase a client's hand-washing skills. The analyst uses a video model showing the steps of hand-washing, which the client watches before attempting the task. This is an example of using which type of prompt? A. Verbal prompt. B. Physical prompt. C. Visual/video prompt. D. Gestural prompt. Answer: C. Visual/video prompt. This question asks you to identify the type of prompt used. A prompt is an antecedent stimulus that helps evoke the correct response. A video showing how to do something is a visual prompt. Verbal prompts involve spoken words. Physical prompts involve physical guidance. Gestural prompts involve pointing or other movements. Videos and pictures fall under the category of visual prompts. Question 54. A behavior analyst wants to determine if a new reading curriculum is responsible for improvements in a student's reading fluency. The analyst measures reading fluency for a few weeks, baseline, then introduces the curriculum and continues measuring fluency. The student's fluency increases significantly during the intervention phase. What is missing to definitively demonstrate experimental control using only this single phase change? A. A functional assessment. B. A clear operational definition of reading fluency. C. Replication of the effect. D. Inter-observer agreement, IOA. Data. Answer: C. Replication of the effect. This question relates to demonstrating experimental control, especially in simple A/B designs, baseline followed by intervention. Showing a change after introducing an intervention in a single instance is suggestive, but it doesn't definitively prove the intervention caused the change. There could be other things happening at the same time, confounding variables. To show experimental control with more certainty, you need to demonstrate that the behavior changes reliably when the intervention is introduced and potentially when it is withdrawn, reversal, or applied across different baselines, multiple baseline, or by systematically changing criterion, or by rapidly alternating conditions. And D. All these involve some form of replication of the effect. Functional assessment, definition, and IOA are important for a good study, but replication is key to demonstrating cause and effect within the design. Question 55. Which statement about punishment is true? A. Punishment decreases the future probability of a behavior. B. Punishment increases the future probability of a behavior. C. Punishment is always a physical consequence. D. Punishment is the same as negative reinforcement. Answer: A. Punishment decreases the future probability of a behavior. This question tests the fundamental definition of punishment in ABA. By definition, punishment is a consequence that follows a behavior and results in a decrease in the future probability of that behavior occurring under similar circumstances. Option B describes reinforcement. Option C is false. Punishment can involve social consequences, response cost, etc. Option D is false. Negative reinforcement increases behavior by removing an aversive stimulus, while punishment decreases behavior by adding an aversive or removing a reinforcing stimulus. The core function of punishment is reduction. Question 56. The ultimate goal of behavior analysis is to A. Predict and control behavior. B. Understand the neurological basis of behavior. C. Diagnose psychological disorders. D. Eliminate all challenging behaviors. Answer: A. Predict and control behavior. This question relates to the goals of behavior analysis as a science. The science of behavior analysis aims to understand the principles that govern behavior so that behavior can be predicted, knowing when a behavior is likely to occur, and controlled, influencing its occurrence through manipulation of environmental variables, while understanding underlying mechanisms, option B, and addressing challenging behaviors, option D, are part of the application, ABL. The overarching scientific goal is prediction and control. ABA doesn't typically focus on diagnosis, option C, which is more aligned with other fields. Question 57. When developing a behavior intervention plan, the most important step before selecting intervention strategies is to A. Conduct a preference assessment. B. Determine the function of the behavior. C. Get parent/caregiver consent. D. Write measurable goals. Answer: B. Determine the function of the behavior. This question emphasizes the importance of conducting a functional assessment. Effective interventions in ABA are function-based, meaning they are designed to address why the behavior is occurring. Example for attention, escape, tangibles, automatic reinforcement. Selecting strategies before understanding the function is like trying to fix a leaky pipe without knowing where the leak is. You might suppress the behavior temporarily, but it's unlikely to be sustainable or teach appropriate alternatives. Preference assessment, consent, and writing goals are all important steps, but understanding the function is foundational for selecting the right intervention strategy. Question 58. A behavior analyst is concerned about the extent to which her RBTs are following the intervention protocols exactly as written. This concern is related to A. Interim Server Agreement, IOA. B. Treatment integrity. C. Stimulus control. D. Procedural drift. Answer B. Treatment integrity. This question uses slightly different wording, following the intervention protocols exactly, to refer to a key concept. Treatment integrity, or procedural fidelity, is the extent to which the intervention plan is implemented accurately and as intended. If RBTs aren't following the steps correctly, the intervention's effectiveness might be compromised. IOA, option A, is about data collection agreement. Stimulus control, option C, is about a behavior happening in the presence of a specific stimulus. Procedural drift, option D, is a lack of treatment integrity where implementation gradually changes over time, but treatment integrity is the broader concept of accuracy. Question 59. A client is learning to make a sandwich. The behavior analyst provides prompts for each step, and the client is reinforced upon completion of the entire sandwich. This is most likely an example of A. Total task chaining. B. Forward chaining. C. Backward chaining. D. Shaping. Answer A. Total task chaining. This question describes a specific chaining procedure. In total task chaining, the client is prompted through every step of the chain in each training trial and receives reinforcement after completing the entire sequence. The analyst may provide varying levels of prompts for different steps as needed. Forward chaining teaches the first step first, then the first two, etc., reinforcing completion of the steps mastered so far. Backward chaining teaches the last step first, then the last two, etc. Shaping teaches a single behavior by reinforcing successive approximations. Since the client is doing all steps with help and gets reinforced at the very end, it's total task. Question 60. Which of the following is an unconditioned punisher? A. A stern no. B. Losing tokens. C. Electric shock. D. Being ignored. Answer. C. Electric shock. This question tests your understanding of unconditioned, primary versus conditioned, secondary punishers. An unconditioned punisher is a stimulus that is punishing without any prior learning history. It's biologically noxious or painful. Electric shock, if painful enough, is a classic example. A stern no, option A. Losing tokens, option B. And being ignored, option D, are typically conditioned punishers. They become punishing because they've been paired with other punishers or loss of reinforcement in the past. You don't need to learn that shock hurts. Question 61. A behavior analyst is developing a plan to reduce a child's hitting. The plan includes reinforcing the child every 10 minutes if no hitting has occurred during that 10-minute interval. This is an example of A. DGRO, differential reinforcement of other behavior. B. DDRI, differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. C. DRL, differential reinforcement of low rates. D. DDRA, differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. Answer. A. DRO, differential reinforcement of other behavior. This question describes a specific differential reinforcement procedure. In DRO, reinforcement is delivered contingent on the absence of the target behavior for a specified period of time or at a specific moment. Here, the child is reinforced if hitting doesn't occur within the 10-minute interval. DRI reinforces a behavior physically incompatible with the target behavior. DRI reinforces an alternative behavior. DRL reinforces the behavior occurring at a low rate. Reinforcing not doing the behavior fits the definition of DRO. Question 62. A client's challenging behavior occurs frequently when demands are placed after a fun activity. The behavior analyst suspects the fun activity acts as a in blank for the effectiveness of escape from demands. A. Discriminative stimulus, SD. B. Abolishing operation, AO. C. Establishing operation, EO. D. Conditioned reinforcer. Answer C. Establishing operation, EO. This question asks you to consider how one event might influence the value of a consequence related to another event. If a fun activity makes the subsequent presentation of demands more aversive and therefore makes escape from demands more reinforcing, the fun activity is functioning as an establishing operation, EO for escape, and EO increases the effectiveness of a consequence as reinforcement, in this case, escape from demands. It also increases the likelihood of behaviors that have previously resulted in that consequence example challenging behavior to escape. An AO would decrease the value of escape. An SD signals the availability of reinforcement, not change its value. A conditioned reinforcer is a stimulus that has become reinforcing. Being ripped away from something you enjoy makes the next task feel even more punishing, thus making escape more valuable. Question 63. When creating a behavior intervention plan, the definition of the target behavior should include A. Examples and non-examples of the behavior. B. The assumed cause of the behavior. C. The primary consequence of the behavior. D. A list of potential interventions. Answer A. Examples and non-examples of the behavior. This question relates to writing a good operational definition of a behavior, a component of a behavior intervention plan. A complete behavioral definition includes objective, measurable, observable criteria for the behavior and often clarifies ambiguous situations by providing examples of what is the behavior and non-examples of what is not the behavior. The assumed cause and consequence, options B and C, belong in the functional assessment and intervention strategy sections, not the behavior definition itself. The list of interventions, option D, is the plan, not the definition. Good definitions leave no room for guessing. Question 64. A graph showing the overall rate of responding over time, where the line can only increase or stay flat, is called A. Bar graph. B. Cumulative record. C. Scatter plot. D. Line graph. Answer B. Cumulative record. This is a repeat concept from question 8, but phrased differently. The cumulative record plots the total number of responses over time, meaning the line can only go up. Responses occurred or stay flat. No responses occurred. It never decreases because responses are added to the running total. Question 65. An RBT is tracking the percentage of correct responses a client emits during a discrete trial training session. What dimension of behavior is the RBT primarily measuring? A. Frequency. B. Rate. C. Latency. D. Accuracy. Answer D. Accuracy. This question asks about the dimension of behavior being measured when calculating percentage correct. Percentage correct is a measure of accuracy or skill acquisition. How often the client responds correctly out of the total opportunities to respond. Frequency, option A, is a count. Rate, option B, is frequency over time. Latency, option C, is the time between a stimulus and the response. Percentage correct directly measures the correctness or accuracy of the response relative to the total responses. Question 66. Which ethical consideration is paramount when deciding to use punishment procedures? A. Using the least restrictive procedure effective. B. Ensuring the procedure is easy for staff to implement. C. Using punishment before attempting reinforcement strategies. D. Obtaining verbal consent from the client's guardian. Answer: A. Using the least restrictive procedure effective. This question addresses the ethical use of punishment. A core ethical guideline in ABA is to always prioritize reinforcement-based strategies and to use the least restrictive intervention that is likely to be effective. Punishment procedures are generally considered more restrictive than reinforcement procedures. Therefore, careful consideration and documentation of why less restrictive methods were insufficient is required before implementing punishment. Ease of implementation, option B, and using punishment first, option C, are inappropriate considerations. Written, informed consent, not just verbal, option D, is required for any intervention, but the principle of least restrictive is specific to considering punishment. Question 67. A behavior analyst suspects a client's challenging behavior is maintained by tangible items. Which condition in a typical functional analysis would be most likely to show a high rate of this behavior if the hypothesis is correct? A. Attention condition. B. Tangible condition. C. Escape condition. D. Alone condition. Answer: B. Tangible condition. This question tests your ability to link hypothesized function to functional analysis conditions. In a tangible condition, the target item or activity is presented for a short period, then removed, creating an EO for the tangible. If the challenging behavior occurs, the item is returned contingent on the behavior. If the behavior occurs at a high rate in this condition compared to others, it supports the hypothesis that the behavior is maintained by access to tangibles. Question 68. A schedule of reinforcement that provides reinforcement after a varying number of responses is called A. Fixed ratio, FR. B. Variable ratio, VR. C. Fixed interval, FI. D. Variable interval, VI. Answer: B. Variable ratio, VR. This question tests your knowledge of basic schedules of reinforcement. A variable ratio, VR, schedule delivers reinforcement after an average or varying number of responses. This produces high, steady rates of responding and is very resistant to extinction. Think of slot machines. Fixed ratio, FR, is after a fixed number of responses. Fixed interval, FI, is for the first response after a fixed amount of time. Variable interval, VI, is for the first response after a varying amount of time. Question 69. A behavior analyst is training an RBT on implementing a discrete trial training, DTT, program. The analyst explains the steps. SD, greater than response, greater than consequence, SR, or SP. This sequence is known as the A. Four-term contingency, B. Stimulus response chain, C. Three-term contingency, D. Behavioral momentum. Answer: C. Three-term contingency. This question refers to the fundamental unit of analysis in operant conditioning. The three-term contingency describes the relationship between an antecedent, A, a behavior, B, and a consequence, C. In the context of DTT, the SD is the antecedent, the client's response is the behavior, and the reinforcement, SR, or punishment, SP, is the consequence. While the SD is a stimulus and the response is a behavior, stimulus response chain. Option B usually refers to a sequence of behaviors where each response produces the stimulus for the next response. The four-term contingency, option A, adds the motivating operation, MO, to the ABC. Behavioral momentum, option D, is a separate concept. The core sequence described is the three-term contingency. Question 70. Which concept suggests that a stimulus can become a reinforcer or punisher simply by being paired with other established reinforcers or punishers? A. Stimulus equivalence. B. Unconditioned reinforcement. C. Respondent conditioning. D. Operant conditioning. Answer: C. Respondent conditioning. This question tests your understanding of how stimuli acquire reinforcing or punishing properties through association. Respondent conditioning, also known as classical or Pavlovian conditioning, is the process where a neutral stimulus is paired with an unconditioned stimulus that naturally elicits a response, or a conditioned stimulus. Through this pairing, the neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus, CS, that elicits a conditioned response, CR. Similarly, stimuli can become conditioned reinforcers or punishers through association with established reinforcers or punishers. Stimulus equivalence, option A, is a more complex concept involving learned relationships between stimuli without direct training. Unconditioned reinforcement, option B, refers to naturally reinforcing stimuli. Operant conditioning, option D, is learning based on consequences, not stimulus pairing. Question 71. A behavior analyst observes a client's behavior and records every instance of the behavior that occurs within a 30-minute session. What measurement procedure is being used? A. Duration. B. Frequency. C. Latency. D. Rate. Answer: B. Frequency. This question asks about a basic measurement method. Frequency is simply a count of how many times a behavior occurs. The description mentions recording every instance within a specific time period, 30 minutes. While you could calculate a rate from this, frequency divided by time. The direct measurement described is frequency. Duration is the length of time the behavior occurs. Latency is the time between a stimulus and the start of the behavior. Question 72. When providing feedback to an RBT, a supervisor should prioritize: A. Discussing the RBT's personality traits. B. Focusing on observable and measurable behaviors of the RBT. C. Providing only positive feedback to maintain rapport. D. Comparing the RBT's performance to that of other RBTs. Answer: B. Focusing on observable and measurable behaviors of the RBT. This question relates to effective and ethical supervision practices. Feedback should be objective and focused on the RBT's performance related to their job duties and the implementation of procedures. This means addressing specific, observable behaviors. Example: you missed recording data for 2 intervals, or you implemented the prompt sequence correctly on 80% of trials, rather than subjective traits. Option A. Feedback should be balanced, including both positive and constructive feedback. Option C. Comparing supervisees to each other is generally not productive or ethical. Option D. Question 73. A client learns to say dog when seeing a picture of a dog and also when hearing the sound a dog makes. This is an example of A. Stimulus generalization. B. Response generalization. C. Discrimination. D. Stimulus control. Answer: A. Stimulus generalization. This question tests your understanding of generalization. Stimulus generalization occurs when a behavior is evoked by stimuli that are similar to the stimulus present during reinforcement, even though the response hasn't been specifically trained to those new stimuli. The response, saying dog, is the same, but it occurs in the presence of 2 different, albeit related, stimuli: picture of a dog and sound of a dog. Response generalization, option B, would be emitting different, untrained responses that serve the same function or are functionally equivalent. Example, saying doggy or barking when seeing a dog. Discrimination, option C, is responding differently to different stimuli. Stimulus control, option D, is the broader concept of a behavior being more likely in the presence of a specific stimulus, and generalization is one aspect of that. Question 74. A behavior analyst wants to decrease a behavior that is reinforced on a variable ratio, VR, 10 schedule. When extinction is implemented, what characteristic would you expect the behavior to exhibit compared to a behavior on a continuous reinforcement? CRF, schedule. A. Faster extinction. B. Slower extinction. more resistant. C. Absence of an extinction burst. D. More predictable response rate. Answer B. Slower extinction, more resistant. This question revisits the concept of resistance to extinction based on reinforcement schedules, similar to question 23 but framed differently. Behaviors reinforced on intermittent schedules, especially variable ratio schedules, are significantly more resistant to extinction than behaviors reinforced on a continuous reinforcement schedule. When reinforcement stops after VR training, the individual continues responding for a longer time because they are used to not getting reinforced for every response. CRF leads to faster extinction because the change, no reinforcement, is immediately noticeable. Option A is incorrect. An extinction burst, option C, is still likely with VR, often a significant one due to the high rate. VR produces high rates, but not necessarily more predictable rates than other schedules. Question 75. Which ethical principle requires behavior analysts to be truthful and honest and not engage in fraudulent conduct? A. Responsibility to clients. B. Integrity. C. Professionalism. D. Beneficence. Answer B. Integrity. This question directly tests your knowledge of the ethical code. The principle of integrity specifically addresses the requirement for behavior analysts to be honest, fair, and truthful in their professional activities and to avoid deception or fraud. Responsibility to clients, option A, is about prioritizing client welfare. Professionalism, option C, encompasses broader conduct. Beneficence, option D, is about doing good. Honesty and truthfulness are core components of integrity.